Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming out on a cold January night. It's great to see so many of you. So yeah, we are here to talk about Doughnut Economics. Oh, it's skipped one for some reason. Here we go, right. Lots of people are scared of economics, but no one is scared of donuts, hopefully, because there's a big plate of them over there. That is Kate Raworth, what she says in every talk that she starts about Doughnut Economics. So I thought I'd just sort of gauged in the room, do we have any economists with us? Has anyone studied it at, brilliant, yeah, at uni level?
What?
At university?
Yes, I did business degree.
Oh, okay, very good. And anyone else ever studied anything to do with economics, sort of? Would anyone call themselves an economist? Well, hopefully by the end of this talk, you will feel qualified to call yourself a renegade economist, because you'll have learnt all about the donut and what it means. Who has read the book? Who has bought the book and then put it in that optimistic pile that we all keep beside our beds that just grows and grows and grows? Yeah, you're all very honest. Yeah, you don't need to have read the book to hopefully partake in the talk. If you have read the book, that's brilliant. And yeah, I think whether you're 8 or 80, people get this. So I have talked to small children about it, and I've spoken to 80-year-olds about it. I've spoken to my granny about it, who really doesn't care about most of this stuff, and she understood it and was like, "Of course, that's a brilliant idea. Why don't we do that?" So yeah, to start with, I thought I'd talk a little bit about what we got up to last year. So Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which is the kind of doing arm that Kate set up, and Civic Square up in Birmingham, together with Huddlecraft, which is an online peer-to-peer learning group, basically came up with this plan to create peer-to-peer learning journey cohorts all across the UK and one international one, where everyday normal people would learn about Doughnut Economics and see how they could apply that in their neighbourhood. So it all kicked off up in Ladywood in Birmingham. You can see lots and lots of people there. So there was groups from the Highlands of Scotland. There was a couple of groups in London. There was a couple of groups in Birmingham. Where else was there? The international one was based in Denmark, but had people attending that globally online from as far away as Brazil and Canada. And the 10 citizens that were part of that learning journey in Cheltenham were fantastic. We had a lot of fun along the way, and the whole point was that none of us were economists. I'm not an economist. That is not what I have studied. But actually, what we learnt over the course of that journey was that everybody has their own lived experiences of how you interact with the economy or the state or at the household level, and everybody had something that they could bring to that discussion. So yeah, it was a fantastic thing to be part of, and there are still ripples of good stuff that are happening all across Cheltenham and indeed globally as a result, which is very, very cool to be a part of. So I thought we'd start, hopefully the technology will work and hopefully everyone can hear it because it's going to come out of that speaker up there. But rather than me introducing the topic, I thought I would let Kate introduce it herself.
Economics means household management, and the question of how a household should manage its resources is more relevant today than ever. In ancient Greece, when the philosopher Xenophon first coined the term economics, he was literally thinking about the affairs of a single household. But towards the end of his life, he applied the question more widely to the management of his hometown, the city-state of Athens. 2,000 years later, in Scotland, Adam Smith looked to the next level up, the management of the nation as a household, asking what makes the economy of one country thrive while another stagnates. And this question has held sway for the past 200 years. So economic thinking has gone from the household to the city-state to the nation-state. It's time to take the inevitable next step. Ours is the era of the planetary household. And this century, we need some pretty insightful managers to guide our planetary household, ones who are ready to pay attention to the needs of all its inhabitants. Let's get to work.
Thanks, Felicity. Can we have the lights back up? Right. Oh, no. All right, bear with. We don't want to watch it again. Here we go. Oh, now it's gone too far. So basically, the fundamental concept behind the donut is changing the goal. So the goal at the moment is growth. It's GDP at all costs. We have to grow our economy whether we thrive or not. And what Kate is proposing is that instead we turn that on its head and say that we have to thrive whether our economy grows or not. So GDP is gross domestic product. It's the total monetary or market value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. And GDP, the things that are counted in GDP might be a bit unusual, I think, when we first were talking in our donut cohort last year and we were looking at what counts in terms of GDP and what doesn't. A tree only has value to the economy once it's been cut down. It has no value when it's still alive in a forest. A murder in the US adds about $1 million to GDP because of things like the state having to get involved in people being paid and productivity increasing in police and law courts and things. Wars are great for GDP. That generates a lot of the stuff that apparently we should be aiming for. And obviously we know that we're at a point in time where we've got the climate crisis, we've got massive inequality, and GDP growth isn't really solving any of that. And let alone that, there are also in a lot of the, what we would say, developed nations, where GDP is kind of stagnating. It's just reached a certain point and then it's not getting any higher, or it's harder to push it higher. So this is the central sort of concept, which is the first of 7 in the book, that we change the goal from GDP to the donut. And we're going to get into what the donut actually is, but I think it's important to sort of bear that in mind, that that is the key goal. So the challenge of the 21st century is to meet the needs of all within the boundaries of our planet. And this is the donut. So basically what we've got on the outside are all the planetary boundaries. So these are the kind of the physics of the Earth, of the planet that we call home. And they're things that Earth system scientists have basically all agreed on, that they're limits that we can't push over. So whether it's climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus loading, so that's to do with fertilizers being used in industrial agriculture, freshwater withdrawals, land conversion, biodiversity loss, air pollution and ozone layer depletion. Those are all the known planetary boundaries that we're operating within. So effectively this is an ecological ceiling. These are planetary boundaries that we shouldn't be crossing because it will lead to devastation that we're starting to see with issues like biodiversity loss and climate change. Now, in the middle, we have a social foundation. So the hole in the middle of the donut is where we don't want anybody to fall through. So this bit here is based on the UN SDGs. So we've got things like food, health, education, income and work, peace and justice, political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing, networks, energy. And that essentially is where you don't want people falling short. So we don't want a shortfall in the middle here, and we don't want an overshoot of the planetary boundaries. The sweet spot is the donut. So this is the safe and just space for humanity, and that's where we're in a regenerative and distributive economy. So the aim is nobody falls through the hole, and we don't overshoot that ecological ceiling, those boundaries either. So I thought what we might do, if everyone's up for moving around a little bit, is to create the donut in the room so that we can all kind of stand around and actually see what that feels like and what it looks like to be stood in the donut. So is everyone up for moving around a bit? Yeah. At least to keep warm. So if anyone has low mobility and they want to stay in a chair, please feel free to do that over here. If you take your stuff with you, because we're going to reconvene around 4 tables afterwards. So the idea is everyone stood on the outside of the circle. We are the planetary boundaries. So those are the things that I was just talking about, the physical limits of the planet that we can't cross. And then inside, you're representing the social foundation. So you are all of the kind of basics of life that people require to sort of participate fully in society. And hopefully, the space in the middle, round here, is that thriving space. So nobody's falling through the middle, and we're not overshooting on the outside. So when we did this up in Birmingham, a really good question that Doughnut Economics Action Lab then posed, once we were all in this format, was how does it sort of feel in each space? So if you're imagining that you are a person, which you are, if you're living in a place maybe where you are struggling to get out of this hole in the middle, so if you're kind of stood here, how does that make you feel? You can't access kind of maybe all of the things that you need. And then likewise, if we're overshooting the planetary boundaries, and you know that our lifestyles and the way that we're maybe living in some countries is really disturbing that natural balance and equilibrium, how does it feel when you're kind of stood here? So that was quite a powerful exercise. I think it works if there's more people and you can kind of have one group moving around and one group not. But especially for those of you who are kind of very visual learners, I think it really helps to stand like this so that you can kind of see and feel that this is the donut. So I'm going to let you all sit back down again, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to pull the 4 tables and then have you sit around 4 tables, if that's all right. So apologise for all the furniture moving, but you'll see the point of it later. But top marks for furniture rearranging. So the interesting thing, and I don't know if you sort of felt it when we were all standing in the donut. Oh, apologies for the terrible resolution on that. Oh, don't worry, you might need to put your glasses on. Yeah, so the thing when you're kind of viewing the donut and when you're standing in the donut especially is that point about balance. So it's that balance between everybody having enough but also not overshooting those planetary boundaries. And when Kate sort of looked at the donut, which she had pulled together from lots of other kind of systems thinking sources, she actually was struck by how much it resembled a lot of the kind of storytelling and symbols from indigenous cultures around the world. So, you know, the yin-yang, I think this is a Maori symbol, the takarangai, Buddhist endless knot, or the Celtic spiral. A lot of these cultures, seemingly independent of each other, have come up with these symbols about living in balance with nature. And I think she refers to the donut as kind of basically a rehabilitation program for the West to kind of get our heads back into this way of thinking. So I just think that's a really interesting point, that actually we're not, essentially nobody in this room, we're not really learning anything new. It's something that we used to know, or that, you know, there used to be knowledge of about this way of living in balance. And there's a really nice story as well, which it comes from a Native American tribe, where whenever they're going out to hunt or forage, you never pick the first thing that you find. You never shoot the first animal that you see, because then you'll never kill the last one. And it's that very much that sense of always being in balance with everything around you, whether it is the natural world or the other people in your community. Relearning how to do that, I think, is fundamental. So where are we at the moment with the Doughnut? So this is the sort of global selfie, I guess, of where we are. As you can see, we're overshooting. So the red is showing the sections where we're overshooting those planetary boundaries, and the red in the middle is showing where there's a shortfall, and a selection here of headlines, whether it's UN climate report, it's now or never to limit global warming, ocean acidification to hit levels not seen in 14 million years. Humans across the globe have microplastics in their bodies, phosphorus pollution reaching dangerous levels. I don't need to go on. I think we're all aware in this room of what's happening. And then in the middle, you can see water and energy shortages are fueling a global food crisis, and the richest 1% own half the world's wealth. The good news, NASA headline here, hole in Earth's ozone layer finally closing up because humans did something about it. So we do actually have examples of where we have been able to turn it around through global cooperation and collaboration to fix issues that affect all of us. But as you can see, this kind of selfie isn't looking great at the moment. And it's also, if you bear in mind that it's the first time that we've been able to see this information, we are the first generation who can look at something like that and understand that these are the issues and this is where we're at. Economists and policymakers 100 years ago had no idea that this was the kind of road that we were on, or that this was what this pursuit of growth was going to lead to. We do know about it. So I think that kind of knowledge, the fact that we can see that and we know that that's our selfie, and we have to make a decision to get off that path and do something differently. We're the first generation to know that, and the only generation who can do something about it. So again, apologies for the poor resolution, but this is basically then showing all of the country donuts, so using all the data available to see who is the closest basically to getting in the sweet spot. So this corner up here would essentially be where any country who was actually in that sweet spot of the safe and just space for humanity, that bit here, that's where they would be if they were in it. As you can see, no country is in it. So we've got countries over here who are massively overshooting the planetary boundaries. What you can't see is some of them are also, so for example in the United States, actually they've got a social shortfall as well. So whether that's access to healthcare or inequality, they're not perfect on the social side either. And then over here you can see, we've got Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, Bangladesh, Nepal, who are not overshooting that planetary boundary at all, but are suffering massively in terms of people being left in the hole in the middle of the donut.
One point about Nepal, Kathmandu is regarded now as being the most polluted city in the world. Most polluted? Yes, I was there 40 years ago, it was perfectly clean. It's happened in the last 25 years.
And as we get closer up here, we can see the country that's the closest is Costa Rica, and they have done incredible things in the last 50 years. I think they're at 100% renewable energy now. They're really forging ahead. But I think what's really interesting about this sort of picture is it completely upturns the idea of the developed world and the undeveloped world. Because actually when you look at this, everywhere has work to do. There's nowhere that's kind of perfect. There is literally work to do wherever you are in the world. And I think, that's both terrifying, but also I think puts everybody back on more of an even keel in terms of nobody being perfect, everybody having to do something. So how do we get to the donut? Not with last century's economic thinking. And what Kate does in the book is she puts together 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. The good news is we've already covered number 1, so we've only got 6 to go. And the next one is to see the big picture, from self-contained market to embedded economy. Who is at centre stage? How are the characters described, and what has been omitted? So this is about recognising the potential roles of the household, the commons, the market and the state, and their many synergies in transforming economies. So making sure that finance serves the work rather than drives it. And so these sort of pictures that I've put on the bottom here are a very kind of simplistic way of thinking about this. So in the past, what we've thought about is the environment here, society here, and the economy here. And even our language and the way we talk about those things is that they're all separate things. So the environment is something over there. It's something that I go to when I go on holiday to the Lake District, or I go for a walk up in the beach woods or something. The environment is over there. It's not me, and it's not here, and it's not where I am now. And then society is separate to that, and then the economy is even more separate again. So that is something that politicians talk about. It's not for me. They're all separate entities, not kind of anything to do with each other. Actually, what we need to get to is something more like this. So the environment and our planetary home underpinning everything, that without that, actually we don't have a functioning society, let alone a functioning economy. So then within that is society, and within that is the economy. So the economy is embedded in service to society and the planet, rather than the other way around. And it's also about bringing in people who feel excluded from this. So I think I mentioned at the beginning, like, you just hear the word economics and you think, well, that's nothing to do with me. That's not my place to have an opinion about, because I don't understand it. And you can only have an opinion about it if you've studied at university and you've read Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, and you know everything about everything. Actually, what we need is more people to feel empowered, that they do have a basic level of understanding and they know that something's wrong, which I think most people do know, that there's something up and we need to be doing something about it. And also, if you think about that root word, as Kate mentioned in the video, that it literally means household, so eco, whether that's in economy or ecology, it's the same root word and it means household. And actually most households are pretty good at budgeting and pretty good at understanding their own economy. So, you know, why not have more participation at a wider scale? So the next point, we're good. So the next concept is to nurture human nature. So from rational economic man to social adaptable humans. So this guy here is rational economic man. He is what all of our economic policies are based on. And he only thinks about himself. He stands alone with money in his hand, a calculator in his head, ego in his heart, and nature at his feet. He has insatiable needs and wants, and that is our picture, basically. That's what we have created as the sort of template for humanity. And what's really interesting about this is that when economics students are kind of introduced to this concept of rational economic man, they did some behavioural psychology studies, and they showed that actually the more that economics students were taught about him and that he was the basis for all the policy making and all the decision making, the more they became like him. So it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy that actually if we base all our policies on this guy, this kind of guy who knows the cost and benefit of everything before he makes a decision, the more we agree, oh yes, well everybody is like that and everybody's just kind of out to buy everything they can. Actually, that becomes us after a while. The kind of stories that we tell and the pictures that we create are what we become. So arguably, we need to go from this rational economic man to social adaptable humans. So for that, I've included a picture here of our little Planet Cheltenham group. They're not learning about Doughnut Economics yet. They might do in the future, hopefully. But it's kind of about changing this image to actually one of nurturing human nature, which is actually about collaborating. It's about learning from each other. You know, we learned that through the peer-to-peer learning journey last year, that overwhelmingly people want to cooperate, they want to share. And an interesting story on that is that, you know, you've probably all heard about fight or flight. So, you know, when there's a disaster or when something happens, you get an adrenaline rush, and that's your fight or flight reflex, which is true, that is part of it. But actually, the more that they've studied that, they've also found that there's a tend and befriend reflex. So actually humans also check if other people are okay in a disaster. They help out. They do things like, after terrorist attacks, everybody goes to donate blood. Overwhelmingly, people think of other people, not just of themselves. And I think, you know, if economic policy could reflect that a bit more, we'd probably be looking at a very different picture than Rational Economic Man. I should say as well, if people have questions or want to talk through this, then don't feel you have to wait until the end. We can discuss as we go through.
Comment on what you just said, that if people, yes indeed, people behave well in a crisis, but they don't seem to think much nor in normal life. And if they're a bit more aware in the normal run of things, then we wouldn't get a crisis.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Also, we're taught every single day that consumerism is just, is the disease that we all need to have, right? I mean, it's...
Happy people don't buy enough stuff.
Exactly. Everywhere we go, it's like we're seeing messages to buy stuff.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, there is so much on this planet that shouldn't actually be in production.
Yeah.
Focusing on services more than manufacturing
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
You're getting ahead. We'll talk about that in a minute.
That's a very good point. The problem today is that people don't think that they are the problem. It's always somebody else. And I used the example in the Echo, that I had in the Echo recently, of all the traffic in Cheltenham. We all know that it's polluting, and they always talk about electric cars, but most people haven't got them. It doesn't seem to stop anybody thinking, well, I'll walk today, or maybe I'll catch the bus, rather than get in that car and nip half a mile down the road. And until that thinking changes, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I think, but...
I don't know how you change it.
Well, that's the point, I suppose, is that the more, and especially post-COVID, I think as well, the more we can come together to have these types of discussions about what the issue is and what the solutions look like, the more we sort of move towards them. And I would say as well, so Kate, I can't remember if she talks about it in the book or if she's spoken about it since, but that there are a lot of kind of studies and theories as well that it takes 3 or 4 generations. So from the kind of conception of an idea to then get enough buy-in and for that to spread widely enough. So actually 3 or 4 generations, a lot of this economic thinking was about in the 70s and 80s, but it was called different things like ecological economics or development economics. So actually we're about 3 or 4 generations in since then to start having conversations about action and acting on it. So then this is sort of building on that nurturing human nature. So we've got ego on the left and eco on the right. If this is the hierarchy that we've kind of had instilled in us from a young age, it's quite difficult to sort of not think that. And I was involved in a project with Luke Jerram, the artist, during lockdown in 2020, where he took some of my words from a blog post that just said, "You are nature," and blew them up in sort of metre-high letters and put them on top of Robinswood Hill. And lots of people sort of were taking pictures with them and stuff. But it was basically to kind of get people thinking about the fact that we're not kind of in charge of nature, we are a part of nature. And I think the more we can do that, the better. So it was great. So CK Futures ran the We Are Nature campaign last year, which I think was massively successful. And maybe that's one of the answers, is engaging people in lots of different ways, at lots of different levels, even at that sort of hyper-local level of their neighbourhood. So, on to the next one, getting savvy with systems, from mechanical equilibrium to dynamic complexity. So this is basically where she's talking about this idea that 200 years ago, when they were coming up with all the kind of fundamentals of the economic system that we have now, they were absolutely obsessed with making it like the laws of physics. So the more they could come up with sort of making it sound as sciencey as possible, and that these were like laws that could not be broken, the more they were into it. And that sort of left us with a system where it is very much like black and white thinking, like this is right, this is wrong. Actually, we know if we look at the planet that we live on, the relationships that we have, it's about dynamic complexity. So feedback loops, things can change all the time. And it's about less kind of this model of like supply and demand, X equals Y, actually getting to more of a gardening analogy with policy making, is that actually you need to tend things. We can use like nudge theory to get people to do things that are better for them, hopefully, and do less of things that are worse. And we've seen examples of this, so like with smoking and having pictures on packets, and you know, that's something that has changed dramatically in terms of the number of people who smoke over the last 50 years. And it's still obviously with that element of it's up to you, whether you're nudged or not is very much up to you, but it changes that kind of social contract that's going on in the background. And it's making it more of an art than a science. So it's not a fixed, you know, we've already talked about those planetary boundaries which are fixed. Actually, economics isn't fixed, it's something that we invented, and we can just as easily reinvent as humans. So the next concept is to design to distribute. From growth will even it up to distributive by design. So this is moving away from this concept of trickle-down economics. So, you know, we've all heard, hopefully, of trickle-down economics, this theory that, you know, if the wealthy make more money, that's fine, because eventually it'll all sort of trickle down and it will go to everybody, and, you know, that's how you solve inequality that's built into this system. Actually, what we know is that money flows in and it doesn't overflow the top of the bucket just gets bigger. And that's what's been happening with that concentration of wealth in the 1%, in the 10%. What we need to do is transition and have it distributive by design. So this ball is an example. You can see there's like that ball of orange in the middle, and all of the nodes on the outside are basically connecting back to that ball in the middle. And that's where it's kind of the owners of stuff are capturing all the value, whether it's in a corporation, it's all funneling back into the middle. What we need to do is transform from this into this, which is basically kind of a distributive model of lots of different nodes. We're already seeing this with stuff like community energy, with things that are like open access online, and technology is having a big impact in helping things be distributive by design, because you can access, you know, a plan for a self-built house, whether you're in Colombia or whether you're in, you know, Nepal or wherever, you can access those same plans. It's about planning things to be distributive by design and making those choices when you're creating something.
Sorry, is it also true then that the trickle-down economics that doesn't work is because, and the trickle-down economics coming from the 1% of the people that have all the wealth, they are the creators, and the people in the bucket are the consumers. So are we encouraging the people in the bucket to be creators more?
So
to decrease consumption so that the economics stays in the bucket.
Interesting, I like that. I don't know that we would necessarily call them creators, because mostly they're just owners.
Or producers.
I'm not
producing the stuff that the consumers are buying.
So mostly, in terms of that 1%, it's mostly because they own stuff. So it'll either be land or businesses, for example.
But business
potentially, but mostly that, you know, if it's financial services, they're not even really, they're producing financial products, but not like stuff. Not that, you know, we would be buying from them, I suppose. There's a really good quote as well. So there's a company called Elvis and Cressy, and they basically reuse old fire hoses and turn them into bags and wallets and all kinds of stuff. It's a very cool company. And she said, the woman who set up that company said something really interesting in a talk I was at a couple of years ago, where she was talking about creators, or more in the form of creatives. So people who are creative, are innovating, or thinking up different things. But if you're applying that in a business which is destructive, either to the planet or to people, you're not actually a creator, you're a destroyer.
Yeah.
So that, I felt like that was really an interesting way to sort of turn it on its head. And also people who are creative, who can do all the things that I can't do, like, you know, draw or come up with a marketing campaign or whatever it might be, using those skills towards regenerative businesses rather than destructive businesses.
I think I probably misused the word creator a bit. I think I meant more about the people that make stuff, or just generally produce stuff, and the people that generally consume stuff.
Yeah.
That if we can try and educate the people that generally consume stuff to be part of the community a lot more and become generating their own things that do good for
I see, yes, yeah. So things like sharing economy or circular economy, where your goods and services are kind of going around communities, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Can I add to that? On that note, something that you don't hear about much to do with renewable energy. Well, a lot of renewable solar, for instance, you generate it locally where you are, but the narrative is still based on low carbon, which is correct. But the other half of the equation is about the fact that the shift in ownership of the renewable as a resource is actually doing this by definition.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But most people don't seem to be aware of it. So the transition to zero carbon, by definition, can be on this basis, but only if it follows the community.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't. Did anyone come and see 2040, the film, when we had it on here? So if you haven't seen 2040, do go home and check it out. I think it's 90 minutes long. It's a really good film. Kate's in it. That's not the only reason why it's a good film to watch. As you can tell, I'm a big fan. So in that film, they talk about solar power, community solar power networks in Bangladesh, where it's basically cutting out the need for a kind of state-owned energy company, essentially, which would be what would be in place otherwise, because communities can generate their own power and use it at source. So they own that energy, essentially, which you're right is completely distributive by design. Yes, I was just using that as an example. Yeah.
On the energy front, I'll just make a point. Oxfordshire, for example, have got what they call the Low Carbon Hub. Now, this is an organisation which I don't think is unique to Oxfordshire, but they use the money within the community. People locally can invest in the solar panels and the renewable energy farms that they are developing. But their main aim is to get involved with people of Oxfordshire and roundabouts in financing this sort of thing. The same sort of thing could be done all over the country if the government really sponsored it, but at the moment it's just local initiatives. Yeah. And if you have to read an alternative magazine, or if you even find out about it, you know.
And there's some interesting, so on the community energy point as well, there's a company called Ripple, who are, I'm not on commission from them or anything, but they are trying to address that issue of if you live somewhere and there's not a community energy scheme, or you don't live somewhere that's suitable for solar or wind power, if you live in a city, for example, you can actually buy a share in a wind farm project. So it's kind of exactly like you were saying, it is that local element, except it's not everybody living geographically together. You can live anywhere and you can own that share in a wind farm and benefit from reduced energy bills as a result.
So
yeah. We're nearly there. So this is just another example. So this was from a report that Oxfam released just last week. And this is just another example of the distribution of wealth, I suppose. So this is about what new wealth that's been created between 2020 and 2021. So this is during the pandemic, essentially. The richest 1% gained 63% of that new wealth. the bottom 99% gained 37%, the bottom 90% gained 10% of new wealth created. So we can see that actually the cumulative effect here is that the inequality is widening over time. It's not doing that. Growth isn't evening it up. It's actually getting wider.
Have you got anything to say about how you're measuring that wealth? I mean, you can take one extreme example. A company like a social media company, Mr. Musk has just bought one, hasn't he? But its intrinsic value to me is zero. It makes money out of advertising and that, but its intrinsic value, I mean, his wealth in some companies has shot enormously for some of these high net worth individuals during the pandemic. But in some cases, when you look at it, it's the share price that's gone up and they own a certain number of shares. Their actual wealth, their money in the bank, their number of properties, their number of yachts, and that hasn't gone up. I'm not defending it. I have respect for those that, like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, are putting money back into the world and doing their philanthropic bit because they've woken up and realised, and I think this is part of what we need to do, is get that message further heard, that so you can have all this money, but it's no good if there's no air left to breathe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you want to live in an oxygen tank for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
You can afford it.
Or move to Mars.
I don't want to live. Yeah. And so this is part of the problem. There's a huge amount of wealth, but it's also how you measure that wealth and how you measure who benefits from that wealth. I think it's a difficult thing to measure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not disputing your facts.
No. And I'm happy to show you that was the Oxfam report was with Credit Suisse, so I think they've got all the methodology behind that. But it's a good point because it also raises the issue then of taxes. So Warren Buffett, I think, has said quite recently he's paying the lowest taxes that he has ever paid. He's richer than he's ever been, and he's paying the least tax that he's ever paid. So something is going wrong there if even Warren Buffett is saying, please can I pay more tax? He has, yeah.
But it has to be used again for the right purposes.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then use it to go to war somewhere, then you could argue that's a complete
the next one, create to regenerate. From growth will clean it up to regenerative by design. So this is, again, rather than growth will even it up in terms of inequality, this is that you have to go through a very dirty stage of digging everything up and polluting everywhere, and then you'll get to a point where you can kind of clean it all back up again. We don't have to do that anymore. We can make everything regenerative by design. So these three examples, so this is a linear economy. So if you imagine a hose pipe and we put stuff in the top and we take it and we make it into stuff and then we throw it away. There is no away. It has to go somewhere on Earth, and it's either using landfill or using the atmosphere as an open sewer that we just pump stuff out into. So, or the ocean, absolutely. So then here we've got a recycling economy, which we're probably sort of halfway into. So some things are being recycled, they're being reused again, but actually there is still stuff going away. There's no system in nature where it throws stuff away. So you'll all remember the water cycle, carbon cycle, whatever it might be. Nature doesn't go, no, I don't need that bit. What do I do with it? I'll just put it over there. We need to basically mirror nature with all of our systems, whether it is manufacturing, whether it is renewable energy, where we move towards fully circular models of doing things. So that hose pipe that currently has just got loads of stuff coming out of the bottom, we join it back together and we turn waste into a resource that can be used again and again and again. Another donut, yeah, everything's a circle. So yeah, we're basically kind of outsourcing our environmental destruction. So even if that pollution isn't occurring here anymore, you know, we're not digging coal out of the ground, hopefully, anymore in the UK. But we've kind of outsourced that manufacturing. Other factories around the world are being powered by coal-fired power stations, and then we're consuming the output here. So it's not that we're necessarily seeing that on our doorstep anymore. We've put it out of sight and out of mind somewhere else for other people to deal with.
I think that's got a parallel with the carbon trading, hasn't it?
So yeah, and I think the important thing as well to sort of when we're talking about this linear to circular economy is also the fact that our children, our grandchildren will know that we knew. We can't get away from the fact that when, you know, my 5-year-old grows up and says, but you knew stuff that you were throwing away was going to landfill, or, you know, the images of plastic in the ocean or whatever. You knew that this was happening. But what did you do about it? We have to all be prepared to answer that question in the future, I think. And then the very last concept, so we've made our way, congratulations, pat on the back everybody, we've made our way through the 7 concepts. The last one is to be agnostic about growth, from growth addicted to growth agnostic. So rather than pursuing growth as the end goal, we pursue the safe and just space for humanity as the end goal, and growth might happen, it might not happen, but we definitely shouldn't be addicted to it in the same way that we are now. So this is quite an interesting chapter, because Kate's talking about there's various sections of economists who talk about green growth. Is it possible to still have growth, but that growth is regenerative and it's green? Or is it degrowth, where people are arguing that actually we need to stop things growing altogether? And there's, you know, tension between those two kind of arguments and ideas. Actually, what Kate says, which I think makes a lot of sense to me, is that we don't have to pick one side or another, and essentially it's pitting two groups of people who basically vaguely believe the same things anyway against each other. We just need to not care so much about growth being the end goal. So some things might grow, as in renewable energy stocks, or, you know, things that we need to grow can grow, and other things don't grow. But the difference is that that's not the goal anymore. We're thinking about the whole economy in a very different way. And I think what's really tricky about this is that growth sounds good, because we want our gardens to grow, we want our children to grow, you know, growth, it just sounds good, doesn't it? And the concept of degrowth or stopping things growing sounds bad and sounds limiting, and people just feel certain ways about it. But what she's saying is that if we just become agnostic about it, then perhaps we can get to where we need to be, because it's not saying to companies or to businesses, this mustn't be your goal and you can't make a profit and you don't have to do this. Actually, it's saying, well, you might, but are you distributive by design? Are you regenerative by design? That's fine. So we have successfully gone through the 7 key concepts. So we're now all thinking like 21st century economists. So just, we've only got about 15 minutes at the end, but I'm sure this will be brought out at future CK Futures events, because I'd very much like to work more on this. So this might all sound very nice. Donuts always sound nice. It might sound very pie in the sky. How do we actually get here, and what does it look like? So what Doughnut Economics Action Lab have done is unroll the donut. So what they've done is essentially take this bit here that we want to get in and stretch it out into a line. And then what that creates is 4 lenses. And these are the 4 lenses that places all over the world are using to look at whether they're in the donut or not, how far away are they from being in the donut, and what can they do as a result. So your 4 lenses, so that you've still got your ecological ceiling, you've still got your social foundation, and you have a local ecological, you have a local social, then you have a global ecological and a global social. So I thought it might be quite interesting to have the 4 lenses out on the 4 tables and some pens, and you can jot down any thoughts that pop into your head about how what this actually looks like for Charlton Kings. So to get you thinking, so we've got the kind of 4 areas here. So how can our place be as generous as the wild land next door? So maybe think about the limestone grasses up on the hill, or the ancient beech woodland next door. How can all the people of our place thrive? So here, who isn't thriving here, and what would they need to thrive? And then this is about the global responsibility. So how can our place respect the health of the whole planet? And how can our place respect the well-being of all people? And then just as a few kind of questions to sort of get you thinking. So I'll put out the things on the table. So what have we got? We've got, if I put global social here, and global ecological here, and then we've got local ecological here, and local social here. So feel free to chat in your groups, write anything, any ideas down that you've got. Have a look at those questions that are on the board. Thank you.
Sort of work.
And make sure everybody gets a go with the pen as well, that they get a chance to write something. And then feel free as well just to kind of chat amongst yourselves. If you've got a burning thing that you want to go and write on a different lens, then feel free to go and do that as well. So over to you.